Well, good morning, everybody. I want to welcome everybody here this morning. It's really great to have you here. I'm excited to share with you this morning. We're continuing our series, Enough. And, you know, as we come together, as we encourage one another. I don't know about you, but I was encouraged by Lowell this morning. It's different to hear all the things that we do listed off, isn't it? We don't really think about all those things that we do. And so I'll echo his sentiments and thank you all for what you pour in to the ministry of the gospel here in Vernon. We all have different quirks. One of my quirks, I'll tell you, is I really hate the sound of chewing. Like, I'm not going to do it into the mic this morning, but you know the sound I'm talking about. I hate that sound. And it doesn't bother everybody, but it bothers me. We all have got our own weird quirks. One of my friends, he has a weird quirk where he cannot eat his M&Ms until he has put them in rainbow order. Some people don't like certain numbers. They're superstitious. Many hotels don't even have a floor 13 because of superstition. We've all got our little funny hang-ups, and this morning, I'm going to confess to you one of my more embarrassing ones. Here we go. Cards on the table. I hate change. Now, I'm not talking about changing things up or switching things up. I actually enjoy that kind of change. Variety is the spice of life, after all. No. I'm talking about change. Coins. I hate the jingling in my pocket. I hate pennies most of all. I mean, what can you buy with a penny nowadays? A fourth of a piece of gum? In fact, according to the latest data, pennies aren't even worth the materials that they are minted on. So here's the confession part, the embarrassing part. I will occasionally just toss pennies. Until I got married anyway. I'd always leave the change or give it to somebody else. Now that I'm married, I just hand it to Alyssa. She puts it in her purse. But I hate them. I've probably thrown away close to $100 in pennies over the course of my life. I know, doesn't make much sense. I hate them. They take up space, they're basically worthless, but the thing is, they add up. They have value, but a penny, come on. I can't buy a cheeseburger with that. There's not room in my wallet for that. We as human beings are drawn to things of great value. We're drawn to greatness. We're drawn to significance. And let's face it, we all want to be great. To be something, to be someone worthwhile. We don't want to be small change, we want to matter. When it all comes down to it, we want our life to add up to something. We want to amount to enough. We want to be enough. Our text this morning deals with that desire of our hearts. What God has to speak into that, and how we ought to look at one another. Turn with me, you will, to God's word. It says, after 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. See, Jesus takes some of his closest friends, Peter, James, and his brother John, and they go up a mountain. And I have to think they were expecting to see something amazing. You know, God has a habit of doing great things on a mountain. The 10 Commandments were given on Mount Sinai. God revealed himself to Moses on a mountain. Elijah goes up on a mountain to find God in the whisper. God sent fire down on Mount Carmel. We get this sense sometimes in our lives that before God does something big, he sets the stage. He makes small moves, and if we're looking for it, we see it. The disciples know this. And as they're going up this mountain, I know that they're expecting to see something great, something worthwhile, one of those $1 million moments. And they aren't disappointed. Verse 2. There, he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. This was the spectacular thing they were looking for. This was God moving big time. This isn't no penny moment. It's $1 million moment. The glory of God that had been veiled in human flesh, suddenly Jesus pulls back that veil. They get to see the truth, that God is doing a great work in their midst. Not only that, but their heroes show up. Moses and Elijah show up and they begin to speak with Jesus. The disciples get to be part of this moment that's something bigger than they are, something bigger than they could possibly imagine. And they're right. They're right to think that they're part of something that's bigger than they can possibly imagine. But the glory that they're looking for, the glory that's coming, isn't the greatness that they see. The glory is not in this transfiguration. The glory is in the cross. But those $1 million moments, they're hard to let go of. And Peter's reaction is kind of our reaction to these big moments. Peter says, Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified. But Jesus came and touched them and said, Get up. Do not be afraid. And when they looked up, they saw no one except Jesus. You see, Peter wants to say, let's set up camp here. This moment of clarity, this moment where we get a glimpse of what God is doing in the world, let's stay here forever. These are the good old days. Let's stay here. They have this big moment, and you would expect Jesus to say, now you need to hold on to this. This is that big moment that you needed. This is that significance that you were chasing. This is what life is about. But look what he says, verse 9. As they were coming down the mountain, Jesus instructed them, don't tell anyone what you have seen until the Son of Man has been raised from the dead. You see, Jesus says, this greatness, don't hold on to it. There's this saying we talk about, it says, this too shall pass. The disciples are caught up in this high moment with God, and we do that sometimes. Look, I hope you get caught up in God today. That the worship we've had has touched your heart, you've surrendered yourself over to the Spirit, and God has moved in you, and I hope that you're uplifted. I pray that every Sunday. I hope you've caught a glimpse of what God is doing here at the table as we share the supper together. I hope you catch it through the Word. I hope that you can say with King David in the Psalms, I was glad when they said to me, let us go to the house of the Lord. But there's something more. We don't stay on the mountain. We got to come down. We can get lost chasing that feeling of greatness. But Jesus tells them, this moment is great, and I'm glad you had it. But we're not chasing greatness. We're entering brokenness. And sometimes we're so caught up on our mountaintops that we miss the valleys that God is calling us into. The disciples, like us, they don't get the memo. They thought, in light of the greatness of God, because they've fallen into this $1 million moment, they start to think that they're $1 million people. They try and climb the ladder of success to God, to happiness, fulfillment. And so they ask Jesus a question. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? And see, they're caught up on this notion of worth. They're caught up in this notion of being enough. Repeat after me. God is great, not me. You see, the disciples are consumed by this notion of worldly worth. They've seen Jesus glorified, and they begin to think about how they could be significant. how they could matter. We evaluate our own worth like that sometimes. We look at ourselves and we compare who we are and what we can do, and we make value judgments based on how we see ourselves and oftentimes who others see us as. But Jesus wants to make something clear to them and to us, that God does not think like we do. So verse 2, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." See, we should unpack this a little bit. In the ancient world, children were really the lowest possible social group, the lowest possible status. They were on the same level in terms of respect as slaves when it came to status. The only thing that they really had on slaves is that they would eventually be heirs in the house that they belonged to. You may have heard, growing up maybe, that children were to be seen and not heard. Well, this is nothing like this. This is much, children were nothing, really, in this society. They are pushed to the margins. And Jesus calls this precious child from the margins and places him in the center. The disciples think they're hot stuff. God has just shown them something awesome, but they're caught up in the world's definition of greatness. And I can only imagine what they might be thinking. Jesus, what do you want with a kid? They've got nothing to offer. They don't have what it takes. Jesus tells these people, tells the disciples, tells us, all of us who are so caught up on status, on how many likes they have, on how many Twitter followers they've got, how big their paycheck is, what kind of empire they're building, that they need to let all that status stuff go. Because there's only one status that matters. And it's not how many vacations you go on or how many projects you're the head of. Status businessman, status important, status put together. The only status that matters is child of God. And if we're more worried about our own greatness than we are worried about God's children, no matter how small, no matter how insignificant, no matter how far gone, no matter how they might seem to our human eyes, they are precious. Jesus drives that point home with a parable and teaching. Verse 6. If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea. Woe to the world because of the things that cause people to stumble. Now, sometimes this teaching is put out like it's just talking about children, our intense obligation to lead our children in faith and practice and in love. And I think it does speak to that. And I think that is something we should take seriously. It's one of the reasons we've chosen to invest in Right Now Media this morning, to provide you these resources to care for your children in this regard. But what Matthew's gospel is really getting at here is not really any of God's, it's not really children specifically. It says those little ones, the ones who believe in me. Not just our children, God's children. That includes everybody. Specifically, those little ones, maybe weak in faith or struggling with faith, or struggling with the notion of faith, that have, maybe even those who have written faith off. Those ones that might have been forgotten. Those ones we might even look down on. Jesus tells the parable to illustrate this. See that you do not despise one of these little ones. For I tell you that their angels in heaven always see the face of my Father in heaven. What do you think? If a man owns 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, will he not leave the 99 on the hills and go look for the one that wandered off? And if he finds it, truly I tell you, he is happier about the one sheep than about the 99 that did not wander off. In the same way, your Father in heaven is not willing that any of these little ones should perish. Now wait a minute. Hold on, Jesus. Have you ever heard of cost-benefit analysis? That's not how this works. We have these things called acceptable losses. A shepherd should stay and keep the 99 safe. He can afford to lose one. Leaving the 99 doesn't make any sense, Jesus. That sheep's not worth it. And besides, it runs off all the time. Every time there's a crack in the fence, they're out. If there isn't a hole in the fence, they'll make one. They're not amounting to anything. They're a screw-up. They deserve whatever trouble they might find themselves in. Let the wolves have them. It'll be less trouble for you and less trouble for us. Not only does the shepherd leave to find this wayward lamb, he celebrates when he finds it. I don't know about you, but if I had this little lamb that was prone to wandering off, prone to getting out, when I found him, it wouldn't be a party. We'd just have lamb chops for supper. Outside of the world of this parable, in the worldly estimations of success, of greatness, of importance, of worth, the shepherd would be better off letting the lamb go. But in this parable, the sheep are us, and God is the shepherd. And we might think, yeah, one sheep isn't worth it. The 99 are important. That is, until the one is your son, your daughter, you. Because if we're honest, we're all screw-ups. We all jump the fence. If there's not a hole, we make it. We bleat loudly for the wolves to find us, and find us they do. The one is important to God. Because if the one doesn't matter, if it's okay to let the one go, then the 99 have no safety. There is no one too small. No one too far gone. No one insignificant enough that the Father doesn't want them, doesn't call out to them, doesn't reach out to them. No one is insignificant enough for God to give up. And we shouldn't either. The Apostle Paul tells us, imitate me as I imitate God. We are sheep who are supposed to follow our shepherd. So my question this morning is, where is your one? Maybe your one is somebody you've written off. They don't matter enough. They're not enough for God to do anything with. You see, Jesus gave his disciples, before he did this teaching, he gave his disciples this experience of greatness. They got a glimpse of his glory, and they get fixated on worldly notions of greatness and worth. They want to be worthy. They want to be enough. The truth is, none of us are enough. The truth is, all of us are that lost sheep. All of us are that one. It's not about status. We have to recognize that. We must become like children. Recognize our humble position before God so that he can equip us to do more. Maybe your one this morning is a family member. Maybe your one is a neighbor. I mean, think about this. Most of us have neighbors. We got people we live next to. When is the last time we've invited them to be part of the flock? God will never write you off. So we can't write off others. The truth is, we're all wanderers. And we're all reason enough. No one's a penny. The unchurched, the addict, the self-righteous, the fearful. No child of God is insignificant enough to abandon. Not to God, not to us. Go. find, and celebrate. This morning, maybe you have a need, a prayer. Nothing's too small for us to pray over. No one is too far gone for the church to wrap their arms around. We'd be happy to do that. Maybe you need to make that commitment for the first time to humble yourself before God and put on Christ in baptism. If you have any need, now is the time. The Spirit and the bride say, come. Let those who hear say, come. Let come the one who wants to take of the free gift of the water of life. If you have any need, please come now as we stand and sing.